Thank you. I'll indicate to the committee that I have to leave at about 3:15 because the government has scheduled one of my other portfolios in the other chamber, and fortunately the member for Morphett and I share joint portfolio responsibility for this area, so I'm just hoping that we can start with higher education for that reason.
You'll be missed.
I have no doubt, sir. By the thousands of viewers of the parliamentary stream looking at Committee A, and I'll direct
I was actually just about the committee members.
I'll direct them to move to Committee B at that point, except for Dr Patterson, the member for Morphett's father. Budget Paper 4, Volume 3, page 169, one of the objectives of the program area is obviously to undertake strategic engagement and collaboration with higher education providers. What level of departmental resources are applied towards this objective?
So it was very unfortunate, I think, when I came into office to discover that there was almost no resources devoted to higher education policy in the state government. We have gone through a process of determining what's required, and as part of the disentangling from education also, we've been able to allocate $1 million a year to establish a proper office for higher education policy.
So how much was that, sorry?
$1 million a year to establish a proper area. Now, having the funding's terrific, we also need the people, and we're in the process of gathering those people. So if I can foreshadow that for some of the questions the Shadow Minister might ask, it may be that I have to take them on notice because we are yet to determine the precise answers, having had very little policy heft to seek advice from. But I'll do my best.
Well, the Minister, I'm sure, will understand then my surprise at the same discovery I found when I became the Minister for Education, that apparently up until 2018 there were almost no resources across government applied to the higher education function, for which I then had responsibility, and some responsibility was taken by the Department for Education. Some FTEs were hired. I'm wondering, have there been any machinery of government changes that have seen this department given any of those resources that were in the Department for Education, admittedly less than $1 million worth probably, but have any of those now transferred to this department? Or have they been held close by education?
The way in which the machinery of government, which is still winding its way through to completion, but the machinery of government arrangements in this particular matter involved giving resources, funding rather than people, and so that's why we're having to establish it.
And can I clarify, is that $1 million that the Minister referred to before, is all of that coming from the Education Department to this department, or is some of that new money?
On top of the $1 million is coming from the Education Department. On top of that is the funding for the University Commission, that is the election commitment, so that sits separately and above.
But, so to clarify then, the Department for Education is transferring $1 million to this department to establish the Office for Higher Education, and the staff are yet to be hired that will fill that office, but from presumably the 1st of July 2022, that office will be created within your department.
That's it.
Okay, and the staff who are currently performing those roles in the Education Department will remain in education?
I assume so, but don't have line of sight.
They can do what they like. Thank you.
Maybe they all left when you stopped being Minister.
Are there any other resources that have come into this program area through machinery of government or through agreement with other chief executives?
For higher education, no.
Or for the program area that under scrutiny more broadly?
Program one we're in the middle of finalising all sorts of, but I don't think that's subject to this budget line. It's probably not worth going into the details here. Okay.
So in relation to page 170, the net cost of providing services, does this include the $1 million that is being transferred from the Department for Education that's been identified? There's $31,299,000.
It doesn't. No.
It doesn't. So that is yet to be added to the accounting.
I should probably point out also that that Study Adelaide is coming over from infrastructure, investment and trade and investment, yeah.
So Study Adelaide will be becoming part of this program area as well, along with its resources.
That's right.
Is it carrying with it any departmental efficiencies?
I don't believe so, but I'll correct the record if I'm inaccurate about that.
Thank you. The table here shows a relatively significant drop from $43 million last year to $31 million this year, notwithstanding the $1 million extra that is coming in from education. There's an explanation underneath that explains $11 million of that drop as a result of a notional allocation of departmental efficiencies. Can the Minister identify what is the amount assigned to this program as part of those departmental efficiencies for the following 3 years in the forward estimates? So if it's $11 million, according to this notional allocation at the bottom of page 170, that presumably is for 22-23. Can you give us the figures for the following years?
So we've undertaken a notional allocation for the purpose of these agency statements, but the forward estimates are yet to be determined.
The higher education objective, obviously there is $1 million coming into the department from education to establish this office. Is that $1 million guaranteed to be provided for that purpose, or is any of that subject to be considered as part of fulfilling this departmental efficiency?
Given that it hasn't yet come over, I guess it's slightly beyond the terms of this budget, but it is my intention to spend that money on higher education.
Okay. So in terms of this budget, you can confirm that effectively the higher education objective will not be providing a contribution towards the department's efficiency target?
It's simply too early to determine exactly how we're allocating the efficiencies, so I would want to provide anything as definitive as that, but the intention of having that money is to establish a proper higher education policy unit.
As the Minister said before, there's also an additional $1 million for the coming year to establish the University Merger Commission, and that's on Budget Paper 5, page 90, and the next set of questions will be going towards that one for those keeping score. Can I ask, is the plan that the Office for Higher Education Policy or any other part of the department resources be used to support that commission?
It's probably a little early for us to be clear about that, because we're still, first of all, establishing the higher education policy area and also then determining the precise nature of the commission. And the expectation is that the $1 million will be sufficient to run the commission, but we're still setting both of these entities up.
Do you expect that the commission will be in place prior to the Office for Higher Education Policy, or the other way around?
I am hopeful that we'll have at least one or two policy bodies soon and preceding having the commission.
So can I ask, in relation to the commission, $1 million identified for the financial year, including 3 staff, is that $1 million included for and accounted in the $31 million on page 170 under the department's program budget, or is that accounted for elsewhere?
So it is included, and just to be clear, with the 3 FTE that are there, that's a notional allocation that doesn't confine us.
I understand. Can I ask, who is going to be doing the work in this commission? Are you expecting that it will be an entirely new group of people advertised for new, or are you looking to second public servants?
Look, it is still too early as we're having preliminary discussions with the interested parties to any reconstruction of the university sector and also trying to stand up a new unit in the department. So it's too soon to say how we might staff that, but it will all come out.
How will the University Merger Commissioner be selected? What sort of person are you looking for?
Again, I think it's slightly too early to say in anything other than sort of banalities that we could all agree, someone eminent or more than one person is eminent, a person or persons who are respected by the sector, who have an understanding of different structures. We need to do some more work to get into the detail of this, and that will then, I think, help us determine.
Are you looking to undertake an advertisement for the position or seek input from stakeholders? I have some suggestions I'm sure the Minister would be delighted to hear. Yes. Or are you looking to choose someone and then approach them and go from there?
Look, I think it's unlikely that we'll just put an ad in the paper or on Seek, but beyond that, I'm still open to suggestions. People, not your good self yet, but now perhaps, have been suggesting names, but we need the policy effort to exist first so that we can go through this methodically. The staff existing in the department that currently have been doing their level best to support my thinking in this, but I would rather allow this unit to be established and then to prepare for the Commission.
So to be clear, the policy document, I think it was one of Labor's first policy documents, it describes an eminent commissioner with experience in higher education, and in the subsequent period we haven't identified any other criteria on top of that. We're waiting for the establishment of the unit?
That's right.
Okay. What will be the expectations of the Commission? The document says required to address and manage the risks inherent in this ambitious project. The Commission will be required to estimate the cost of the merger and how the investment required would be realised, and the Commission will map the staffing of universities in order to chart a path of increased employment stability and so on. Are there any other pieces of new information the Minister can add to clarify what the Commission and the Commissioner will be expected to do?
No, I think that probably summarises it reasonably well, which is sometimes surprising for a document conceived in opposition. It's difficult to be very prescriptive from opposition, but that does characterise it. We are working currently on our considerations of how the work could be, the terms of reference and the stages of the process. But we're dealing with a number of stakeholders, and so I'd prefer not to go into detail until we're able to be a bit more public with everybody.
Well, maybe the Minister can identify which stakeholders that she has met with since coming to office in relation to pursuing this Commission, given that the stakeholder feedback seems to be so important in forming the detail of what will be delivered in the Commission.
So to date I've had discussions with the 3 universities, including their management leadership and their governance leadership, and also with the NTEU, and I have at times being set up with the student unions as well.
When you say the NTEU, are we talking about the state body or each of the university branches?
The state body.
And the unions, the student unions, you're looking at meeting with separately?
It would be with each of them separately, that's
Are there any other stakeholders that you're looking to meet with prior to finalising these details?
Look, I think there are many others who have an interest in the university sector, not least being industry partners who seek to engage in research projects alongside universities. But I think once we have policy unit in place and we have an opportunity to speak to all of the stakeholders properly and start to construct the terms of reference for a commission, then we'll be more advanced in being able to include a broader scope of stakeholders.
The funding's identified as being entirely within the 22-23 year. The Minister's suggested there aren't too many more stakeholders that she needs to speak to before finalising the details. Are you able to give us a timeline on when you expect this commission to be established and when it will report to government and the university councils, as I believe it's supposed to under the document?
I don't have a precise timeline yet.
Can you commit to that work being completed by the 30th of June next year when its funding runs out?
I would expect so.
Have any of the Vice-Chancellors or the union representatives that the Minister has met with, or indeed other groups, alumni groups or anyone else who may have proactively approached the Minister with communications of one form or another, expressed any reservations or concerns or opposition to the plan?
I don't want to use this place to convey discussions I've had with stakeholders, particularly as I've named the stakeholders I've met to date. But as a generalisation, it would be reasonable to say that anyone who's spent any time thinking about this issue appreciates why the question is asked and also can see the challenges inherent in changing the structure of our university sector. So people who understand universities and understand university policy across Australia for some time recognise the challenges that face the universities as they're currently constructed. But we all also know how difficult it is to change and the opportunity costs that occur during change. So it would be unsurprising to the Shadow Minister that all issues have been raised with me, but in a respectful and constructive way.
Can I ask then, with the meetings that the Minister has had in relation to this matter, were they informal meetings or were they formal meetings with minutes taken?
Minutes taken. There have been no minutes taken that I'm aware of.
Okay. Might have saved somebody some time in your department there. Can I ask, in relation to the policy document, it determines 5 criteria for the Commission to consider in making its recommendation. I'm not going to go through them. I'm sure the Minister is more than aware of them. So I note that of those 5 criteria that will determine whether or not the Commission supports a merger and sets out how it might take place, agreement from the relevant university councils is not one of those 5 criteria. Is the Minister able to give a commitment to the universities that if they do not want to take part in the merger, the government will not proceed with the legislation over their wishes?
I'm reluctant to engage too much in this because these matters are a delicate conversation to be had. The policy is clear that the question needs to be asked. In fact, it's been asked for as long as I've been conscious of the existence of universities. We came close some time ago. Under the previous government, indeed, there was an announcement that the two of the universities were interested in merging, and it looked like it was all happening, and suddenly it wasn't. So there is a legitimate question to be asked about it, and there are legitimate policy imperatives that suggest that the current structure of the universities may not be sustainable in the medium to long term. How those discussions then unfold is a matter of the fine management through the Commission and by the government, and probably not best managed through an estimates hearing.
Thank the Minister for the answer. Move to page 169 of Budget Paper 4, Volume 3, and it's the original reference that I was talking to. We're not looking at numbers on the page. There were some other commitments that I understand from estimates yesterday within the purview of this Minister to seek the delivery of in relation to universities and teaching degrees. Pardon me. Has the Minister spoken to the South Australian universities about Labor's commitment to require teaching students to have a minimum ATAR of 70, and have they agreed to it?
I haven't commenced those discussions yet. I will after the 1st of July. I don't anticipate that being a difficult conversation to have, although the application at their end may be challenging in some places. But I've been really keen to get a policy unit established so that we can do this professionally and not just out of a minister's office.
Can I ask, is the expectation then that that policy would apply for teaching students who are seeking to start their studies at university next year, or are you looking to have it in place for 2024?
I will know more after I have those discussions.
And are those discussions set to be with the Vice-Chancellors or the executive groups that you spoke to in relation to the Universities Commission already, or are you looking specifically at Deans of Education?
That will be up to the universities at the level at which they wish to have this conversation. And it is a discussion It is not something that can be easily imposed.
Has the Minister or her office approached the universities yet in order to set up those meetings, or is that something that the Minister is waiting for the establishment of the unit within her department?
For those specific meetings, I meet with universities frequently in a variety of forums and for a variety of reasons, but those specific ones are yet to be set up.
Is the Minister expecting that there will be exemptions to the ATAR floor of 70?
I need to have the discussions before I can answer that level of detail.
If the universities, should the universities not be interested in pursuing the policy, is the government willing to legislate and introduce legislation to require them to do so?
I don't want to signal what path we might take before I've even had the beginnings of the discussion with the universities.
Okay, but you're not ruling it out?
Those kinds of questions always sound like a trick question. I'm simply saying I'm not going to countenance options until I've at least had those discussions.
Thank you. Does the Minister have a view on the fact that many students who study teaching degrees and other degrees, of course, entering university without using an ATAR at this point in time? Is there an expectation that teaching degrees are required to have entrance to university through an ATAR?
That is all part of the discussion. It is interesting, of course, as you would know very well, having been the Education Minister, most people don't understand how many people go to university without having an ATAR.
More than half these days.
Exactly. Half the people who start university in a given year not coming through, I've just left school, here's my ATAR. So I understand that, and the universities will understand that very well. The discussion has always been premised on wanting to make sure that not only do people who are likely to be very good teachers study teaching, but also that there's a degree of respectability associated with the quality of the course that one's trying to enter. That'll be the starting point of the discussions for me. I have always, when I was previously Education Minister, been interested in the quality of the graduates and less on who starts a teaching degree, more on how they finish it and their quality. But I also understand the desire for people to ensure that the people who teach their children are intelligent, educated and competent at the literacy and numeracy. So this is part of that, but I want to have the discussions with universities before getting into what do we do about the ones who come through alternative mechanisms. I'm very supportive of alternative mechanisms of going to university, of course.
Look, I recognise there's an enormous degree of nuance, and the Minister's answer is wise, but there's not much nuance in the Labor policy document that the Minister is now seeking to implement, which says that there'll be a minimum ATAR for teaching degrees of 70, and the fact that more than half of students we've identified aren't there through their ATAR. Will those who are entering through other ways and don't have an ATAR be dissuaded from entering this course, or indeed will those who would be eligible under a non-ATAR criteria but who also have the bad luck of having an ATAR, will they have that ATAR floor applied even if they would be otherwise eligible?
This is all the nuance of the actual delivery of the policy. So the policy intent is clear. Students who start university not through an ATAR process nonetheless go through a process. They don't simply say, well, when you turn 21 you can show up. There is a selection process that enables students to choose different courses that becomes effectively an ATAR equivalent. So we'll work through that level of detail, and I don't anticipate it being a particularly difficult conversation with the intent that there is an expected standard of teaching quality that comes from the quality of people's capacity to undertake work in going into the course. There will be methods for establishing equivalence.
My understanding is that most of the occasions where there have been students with ATARs of less than 70 who've been allowed into teaching degrees in recent years have often had compassionate grounds, might have been carers through Year 12 or suffered some sort of injury or health issue. And while the ATAR might not have been there, there's been grounds on which the universities have seen fit to allow them in. Can I just get confirmation from the Minister that she thinks that's a reasonable approach?
These are exactly the kind of conversations I expect to be having with universities, and we'll work through how that translates in order to fulfil the election commitment to the best of our ability, while nonetheless allowing for an estimated equivalence that is reasonable. I would note that looking through last year's intake, nearly all the teaching courses had a minimum ATAR of 70. So we're not dealing with a dramatic crisis of very low ATARs going into university. There is a stated ATAR selection of 70 for nearly all of them. In fact, the only one last year that I could find was for special and disability education that was slightly below. So we'll discuss this. The universities are very used to being able to have an equivalent assessment for people without an ATAR or with an out-of-date ATAR, so that they are still nonetheless getting students in who will be successful at the course they're undertaking. They're past masters at this, and I bet we'll be able to resolve it probably in less time than it takes to have an estimates discussion about it between the two of us.
Well, this is one of the key points in Labor's 7-point plan for teaching quality, right up there with specialist subjects for specialist teachers.
Member for Moriarty,
Sorry, I'm happy to move on.
I've given you quite a bit of latitude. I hope you noticed that.
I have one more subset and
And
then I'm
so
out.
can we have some questions rather than all the commentary, please?
Thank you. I was wondering if the Minister is able to identify in relation to the scholarships, which were part of the same policy document, how many scholarships in each of the categories are expected to be offered in each of the years?
Look, that ought to be reasonably straightforward for the policy unit as soon as it's established to negotiate with the universities. I think we'll be able to deliver that really quickly. But I don't have here in my briefings what that might look like.
The scholarships are identified as 400 scholarships over 4 years at $5,000 each. Are we able to get a breakdown? I'm happy for it to be on notice of what is the proposed expenditure in each year. And if possible, I think the Minister said before there's no breakdown yet of between the 4 categories. But so for the overall in
to the
each
extent
years.
we have it as of now, I'm happy to supply on notice. Otherwise, if we are still evolving it, which I suspect is largely the case, then we either have this discussion again at next estimates, or I'm able to answer it through making this information public at an earlier date.
Can the Minister identify if she expects all of these 400 scholarships to be provided between now and the next election, or will a group of them, is the expectation that they be provided in 2016 for students entering university in 2017? 2026,
Yeah.
entering in 2027. I wrote 2014 in one of my questions before.
We haven't yet had the transfer over from, because it was initially allocated to education, so when we know that, we'll let you know.
Is the expectation that Aboriginal students who are likely to receive this scholarship will also be able to receive the Amy Levi scholarship worth substantially more that they're currently receiving as well?
I don't know how we'll deal with interactions with other scholarships.
Has there any thought been applied to considering how will men wanting to study primary teaching be assessed?
Not yet.
And is it expected that the scholarship will be a lump sum? Is it going to be $1,250 per year for a 4-year degree, or some other mechanism of...
Yeah, we'll work that through with universities on what they believe is the most appropriate way to do it. The lump sum can be very helpful at the beginning of a course, but of course there is a dropout rate, so I'll be interested to have those discussions. And you're off.